Okay, let's talk about examples of selection bias. So we're going to go ahead and do some rapid fire selection bias examples here, just to get your intuition built up on selection bias, and then we'll go into the details right after. Okay, selection bias is a little bit more complicated, so I want to have a little diagram over here to refer to. So I've got A. I'm going to go ahead and say A is not necessarily related to Y. However, I will suggest that A has an effect on something up here, which I'll call C, and Y also has an effect on something up here, which I will call C. And we can go ahead and call C. I'll again give it this sort of orange color. And we are conditioning upon C. I call this C because in a way we are censoring the population, as you'll see in just one moment. Okay, let's do some examples. Okay, example number 1, loss to follow-up. So loss to follow-up, this is pretty much the most basic example here. You have some sort of study, participants give you the answers to your study, and you lose some of the participants along the way. An example could be a treatment for some sort of drug. This treatment might cause death, but what you're really interested in is whether this treatment reduces your cholesterol. And cholesterol, having high cholesterol, of course, could cause death as well. So both A and Y can cause death, and we're going ahead and conditioning on whether the patients are alive at the end of the study. This might be 5 years down the line. So for example, we're conditioning on their common cause, which is selection bias. Again, I want to say we're conditioning here because we are dividing the two groups. One is dead and one is alive, and we're choosing to restrict our study on those that are alive. So in that sense, we are conditioning. Okay, so loss to follow-up is 1. What else? Let's go ahead and do non-response bias. So non-response bias. Bias. So this one is somewhat similar. You can imagine a study in which you're having people do something perhaps embarrassing or something that they are very likely to forget. So for example, A might make them more likely to forget to respond to a survey. And the survey itself, the results of this survey might also make them more likely to forget. Or I guess a very common case here would be A might be the treatment, like number of, assigning to like a particular doctor or something like this. Perhaps patients have a bad time at particular doctors and therefore they don't want to participate in the study afterwards. They don't want to go ahead and follow up with a little survey. And perhaps whether the patients get treated or not, finally afterwards, will make them more willing to. So if they have a successful treatment in the end, they might be more willing to go ahead and fill that out. So that's an example of non-response bias. Non-response bias has its kind of like sort of darker side, or I guess lighter side in this case, with volunteer bias. So volunteer bias is kind of like the opposite in this case, whereas non-response bias were cases where individuals would necessarily be less likely to respond. Volunteer bias is where individuals would be more likely to respond. So patients that have favorable outcomes or patients that are exceptionally proud of their physical health might go ahead and respond. So a classic example of this would be smoking or being physically active. So you might do an example where you treat people with some sort of smoking cure, and those that are more physically active might be more willing to participate in this study. Okay, let's do 2 more. Next one, we'll talk about healthy worker bias. Healthy worker bias. Healthy worker bias in this case would refer to, so we're going to be again restricting our study to a specific segment of the population. In this segment of the population might be people that are at work. So for example, we treat these people with a specific, maybe not a drug in this case, with some gloves or a new tool. This tool could cause them to get injured, right? And this would mean that they wouldn't be at work. And this tool could also cause their performance to go up, which would mean that they would be more likely to be at work. So in both of these cases, A is related to C, Y is related to C, and we're conditioning upon C, where C is being at work. Okay, let's just do one more. Okay, one more of these. Why don't we go ahead and just do missing data bias? Missing data bias. So missing data bias is very similar to something like non-response or volunteer bias. In this case, sort of the onus is on the practitioners. So in this case, if some treatment causes the practitioners to be less likely to record the data, as well as an outcome also causes practitioners to be less likely to record the data. So for example, if hostility in some area goes up, they're less likely to record the data. And as well, if they treat them with some sort of more violent outcome or something like that, they might be less likely to record the data. And so in both of these cases, once again, we're conditioning upon a common effect. So hopefully a couple of these examples have resonated with you and you understand at least one or two of these as to what selection bias is. If not, no need to worry. We're going to be going and diving into more details right after this.